Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second installment of going around the world and looking at nubs with myself and Phil at Ancient Alternative View. Phil, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. Pleased to be here to do part two of our travels around the world looking at the nubs. I think that India will shock everyone at the not only the amount but the variation on the different temples that we've seen across our searches for India. Today we're
Agreed.
looking at Tamiya, which is one of my favourite temples. I know that you love this one too.
Me too, yes.
It was one of the temples that brought me to look at an ancient stone nub language. And when I first saw this wall, I tried to apply Polybius's squares and Caesar shifts to the whole wall, to be quite honest with you, to see whether the nubs may be a language, which is why I recorded the stone nub language and looked at different temples and walls that showed the variations such as this. And as you can see, each block doesn't just have standardized nubs, they're in different positions
Mm-hmm.
within the wall. And also the columns and the facades at the top almost look to me as if they've been broken off and filled in
I see that
at the
too.
top of the columns.
The missing parts of the lintels and the ragged edges on them. I see that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
these blocks
And if you
above.
look as well in between it, yeah, it looks like it's been maybe repurposed at some point in time, like maybe a different generation of builder. Maybe the nub blocks were added in later on, that this was more of an open format.
I can see that. It looks like some kind of colonnade, an open colonnade, and then maybe a secondary group of engineers came through and put up a wall, but because they wanted to portray a message, they needed the wall, so they've built this wall as a secondary addition to say their message, whatever the message might be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And an application to using the Caesar shift and Polybius square, I must have tried 200 or 300 different variations of that, but because I didn't have a key to prescribe it, I couldn't decipher the language, which I know you and I have been trying to do for many moons now. It's
Right.
the depth of the nubs that I find interesting. Some are what you and I have named as standardized nubs. There's some circular nubs as well. We'll show that on a photo in a minute.
Right.
And it seems to me that the nubs are very small within these blocks. They're almost like bricks we would use today. They're not huge like the Menkure pyramid would be, for argument's sake, are they, Andrew?
True. And yes, there is a little bit of a polygonal nature to some of the blocks. The courses aren't exactly straight. There's a little bit of an undulation going on. It seems to stop with these lighter colored blocks with the cruder fitment. There's no more polygonal nature to these at all. It's just stuck in however they could fit them. But there does seem to be some kind of at least slight polygonal nature to some of these sections, which, from looking at all the sites we've looked at, whenever we see some polygonal blocks, we know that it's probably pretty old.
I like to the far left-hand side of that image that there's
Hmm.
almost a section right over at the other side of the temple, at the left-hand side, that
Hmm.
hasn't got any nubs on at all,
It completely
which I
stops.
find very, very interesting.
You're right.
Yeah, yeah, and some of the blocks are coloured as well, like almost as if this entire front may have been maybe different colours at one point in time, but you get your singular ornate nubs to the far left-hand side. Very, very interesting that
Hmm.
they show different variations on one wall here.
Hmm. But like we see in Peru, they are usually around doorways. So to see them clustered around the door like this, it's not unfamiliar to us.
Yeah, I agree. South America shows different variations, doesn't it? We've looked at that on our last episode. I
Hmm.
find these nubs are very intricate, very small, very ornate in comparison to what we may see at Ollantay Tambo or Sachete Schwan, for argument's sake, or, you
Hmm.
know, it's a different set of nubs. Maybe the same engineering capability, but a different set of builders, because we know this is a worldwide culture. We know this is a worldwide engineering phenomenon, but
Yes.
this wall does prescribe to me a language. And we've got a better shot than that
That's right.
we found from Google Earth.
We've got
and it shows in more detail and a higher resolution, in my opinion, exactly this same wall, but from a different angle. And you can see the drain spouts almost give off on our other photo. They give off like almost like a shadow play, for argument's sake, which is what I used for my Polybius square and Caesar shift, maybe as a start for a language. I know Chris Spinner and the Stone Nub language on Twitter, he applied the variation to look at the stars. I think it was Pleiades we looked at on the Stone Nub language. As you know, variation is key to knowing and understanding the nubs, isn't it, Andrew?
It is, and I like the idea of the drain spouts being maybe like a sundial, that could be the dial for them. We see over here on the right, we see another. It's not necessarily a drain spout because there's no groove in this one, but there's a very large protruding nub, maybe plonked in, maybe part of the block, hard to tell, but it looks like a focal point, right? And you can see the shadow coming off of it and how it could point to the nubs.
I hadn't really noticed it before, but can you see how the roof has almost been raised at the top? And that shows nubs underneath it too. It's almost as if that wall was holding them up. Yeah, can you see? It's like the restoration work to the original temple was upheld by the nub engineers, if you like, almost showing kind of three different engineering maybe eras.
I could see that, yes, yeah, and maybe just a final repair at these missing parts at the tops of the doorways, you know, the heavy traffic areas. But yeah, I definitely see multiple eras of work here, and perhaps by completely, groups that are separated in time by maybe hundreds or thousands of years.
I absolutely agree with that, because if you look at India and Hinduism as a start point, then the blue class engineers, or gods, so to speak, were at 3.75 million years ago. So maybe we have to look at a timeline expansion on further videos that I may do or you may do, and incorporate the engineers on a larger span than what we are now, because they're certainly not looked at a timeline as that old, are they, when we're finding this culture all over the world?
That's right.
You know?
Yeah, there's a lot of conservative dating for these India temples, but if they have nubs on them, and there are other nub sites that are supposedly very, very old, well, then I think that we need to reconsider the antiquity of some of these temples, because the nub phenomenon stops at a certain point, and we don't see them anymore after that. So the timeline of the nubs has an end point, and now we just need to work our way back to the beginning point.
I absolutely agree with that. I think Dave at Uchroniutopia, he points at star alignment with these. The variations are very much key to what we've looked at. We know Ziggy Dan has looked at A-stone nubs around India as well, and has been key to some of our research with reference to the nubs that we've been looking at. So thanks very much indeed to the team that we work with for helping us find variations and looking at different aspects towards the nubs. It's not just a Masonic tradition, especially later on. Maybe certain instances may have been copied, but this temple in India does show earlier engineers using the nub skill for sure.
I think so, and it's a very unabashed approach, right? Normally, there's only a few nubs down at the base or hidden in little pockets and corners. Here, they are pronounced on the wall, promoted, kind of like the Kori Concha wall, like we saw on the exterior of the Hierapolis Amphitheater in Denizli, Turkey. In certain places, they were very expressive with the nubs, and they showed them off. And there's very few examples, but the ones we do have, we see, like here, a full wall of nubs, which must signify something much more than just, the simple Masonic stamp that we might be able to attribute to some of the more singular and ornate examples. Yes, those could be stamps or maker's marks, but this is much deeper than just a Mason's mark. It's too complex, and the patterning on it.
I mean, where we showed the Athens Acropolis wall,
right? Good example.
Certain commenters and people that we've spoken to gave the analogy that they could be for climbing, etc. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the Tamiya on the do wall signifies that that possibly couldn't be the case here, and does
Not here, not in this
seem more
case.
conducive to a language, in my opinion, than
Yes.
it does for that sort of reason.
Yeah, I could see that in the Athens example just because of how pronounced and evenly distributed. And yes, they're good handholds, I guess, if you're going to want to climb it. Not here. These are very small, very shallow, very rounded, unnecessary for climbing. I don't see that example or that answer here.
It's also the specific position on the block, Andrew. Some
Mm-hmm.
are to the far left,
That's a good point.
the top, some are at the bottom. Some they're just placed in such different areas on these smaller
Like this
blocks
one.
that, to me, the only thing could be a
This one, yeah.
language that it's portraying on the Tamiya Nadu wall.
That's
And we find in India such different variations we'll look at along the way, like the singular ornate nubs we've found at different temples.
mm-hmm.
But this wall specifically jumps out at me as a language, Andrew.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. You see some of these clusterings and these shapes that they're making. They have to be significant. They have to be. There's a reason why they clustered them in the ways that they did, because there are blocks made by these same people by the same time period right next to the others without nubs on them. So, yes, we have to take that next step and say what's the deeper meaning, and I think we are looking at language here, encoded language of some kind. I really do like the shadow play idea because there are other examples in other high-tech ancient sites. What's it? Rumiak in Peru, the ancient stone sundial carved into the boulder. There are other parallels to this shadow play being used. Even in more primitive examples like the Fajada Butte, which is the sun dagger. It's just a petroglyph, just carved in. But again, they're using this shadow play to either tell time or to keep track of the seasons, to say something. And this might be the most advanced and most in-depth version of trying to say something with this technique.
Absolutely agree. It can't be just down to a solstice marker either. Like maybe the hitching post of the sun could be talked about
Good
as that.
example, right?
We can't say that about it here because the shadow play is pointing towards the nubs at a specific variation in language. It's got to be very advanced, and if it was just simply a clock, then we could be looking at a star alignment clock and specific star clusters like Pleiades, and whether it's pointing at times or a language or numbers, mathematics, is down to interpretation. I'd love to hear anyone else's views on that. I mean, if we go to the front of the temple and
Yes.
have a look, we can see that the entrance to the temple doesn't show that same variation. However, if you zoom in closely, you can actually see that the front of the temple does show more singular ornate nubs. We've got them on there. I mean,
it does.
Why wouldn't it be covered like the side?
Right.
If
just a
it
few,
was,
just a few small isolated ones. And I think there
yeah,
was a couple
absolutely.
on the other side. Yeah, just a few isolated examples, but for the most part, the entrance is stark, and that's actually a departure from a temple we'll look at in the next episode, Brihadishwara Temple, where that entrance is completely covered in nubs, just like the walls here at Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, just to see the singular ornate versions that we get on the doorways here. I mean, there's also bits that have been repurposed on the right hand side, but the
Yeah,
original parts of the temple that are showing at the front of this Tamil Nadu temple, they're singular, they're ornate, and as you go through into the main temple itself, that's where we see the wall we were just looking at, which prescribes the language. But as you say, at the Brihadishwara temple, the entire front of it is covered, and we'll look at that in our next episode, Andrew. And the singular ornate, look at the variation. You've got a circular. Why isn't the whole front of that covered if it was a standardized fixture, the nub phenomenon here? It would be everywhere, wouldn't it?
I agree.
So
yeah.
it does prescribe that the Tamil Nadu wall is a language. Well, to me anyway.
I think so, Phil. And we're just about out of time, and I think we've looked at a lot today, but that says it all. Those two walls, that wall and this wall, it's not uniform, but it's saying something. Okay, everyone, welcome back. We are going to continue where we left off last time, talking about Nubs in India. And like we mentioned in the last episode, we are going to be talking about Brihadishwara Temple, and this is spelled a few different ways, but Brihadishwara, or Swarar, is the most common. And this site shows, like Tamil Nadu, shows some of the most intact walls of Nubs. So I think we'll start here at the outside. And Phil, what do you think of the Nubs on this exterior gate?
Well, I think like when we looked at Tamil Nadu, this shows more of a language because of the variations that we see at the bottom of the temple. They're almost a very similar configuration, aren't they?
Agreed.
Than Tamil Nadu.
Mm-hmm.
And as you move up the temple, we see the more standardized version, much larger nubs, circular. But if you can notice, they're peppered all over the front of this building in different variations. Now, Tamil Nadu look repurposed to some degree, but this doesn't. It looks like it was the original build to me. It doesn't look like this was put together at a separate time. The bottom nubs show that you've got some in the left-hand corner, some at the bottom of the block, some in the middle of the block.
Some
and then
missing.
The variation changes as we move up. Don't you agree?
Yeah, right. The block size does change. You have the, like you said, the larger, ornate, decorative blocks in between. But then, yeah, you have these smaller polygonal above and below, and the ones above, the facade columns, the pseudo columns, or whatever you'd like to call those. These are still original to the rest, contemporary with the rest of the structure. These column bits were not older and filled in later with blocks. This all looks done about the same time.
Absolutely agree. And on the middle part, where you see the smaller nubs underneath, where you've got like the ×2 configurations and so on.
I see that.
Look at how small they are, very ornate, very small. And then you've got the larger nubs as well. So the variation across the front of the building is almost unrivaled, in my opinion. Although Tamil Nadu shows a fantastic wall where it could be a language. This wall here, or this front of this temple, should I say, the Brihadishwara temple, is definitely an advocate for this being a language or a communication of some sort.
I think so.
You say?
Yeah, it's right on the front. It's presented to anyone who would enter. So, I mean, if you were going to write something on a temple, this is where you would do it.
Absolutely agree. And if we take a look at an image as you would be walking through that, and what we would look at as you're going through, you can almost see, Andrew, when you go through the gate, look at the front of the temple again here. It's absolutely covered. And on my video on the Nub language, I look at the front of this.
I've got a better photo.
I prescribe and try and use the Polybius square and the Caesar shift yet again to try and maybe see whether they were prescribing a language. Now, again, here we can see that a lot of this isn't repurposed at all. This is original to the temple itself.
Some curious things going on here. This looks plastered, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't see many joints here. No seams.
Yeah.
But yes, for the most part, I want to say this is all contemporary block work.
And you can see on some of the blocks, they didn't actually, not onto the right-hand side where you set plaster, but on the left-hand side, they didn't have to do the nubs. It wasn't a necessity for them to do that. They haven't put them on every single one. And I noticed some are very shallow and some protrude more than others.
Yes.
And it's very much the same mineralogy of the stone that it's worked to. It's not different.
No, this is the same as the stone.
Absolutely, and they're standardized almost like you'd see in South America as well at Couldenté Tambo.
That same shape. We'll zoom in real close so everyone can see it. That half round shape, the flat bottom, rounded top. We see several examples.
You find that at the Belevi Mausoleum, don't you?
Belevi, Coricancha, it's everywhere. Myra, Turkey, it's a lot of them there in Myra.
Definitely. Definitely. And the shallowness of some of these.
Right.
With depth, I wonder. make any difference to the language? Could parts of it be the depth maybe signify a specific letter or a number?
That's a very good
Or
point.
attribute to a certain star maybe? I mean, I know the variations are key, and we're sort of giving everybody in the audience different variations to. You're all welcome to do the same thing. These are high resolution images. You can all look for nubs yourselves.
That's right.
If you find anything or think of anything that we're missing, we have folders on Pinterest. Andrew would give you access to his folders, as would I.
That's right.
You're more than welcome to have a look, but to me, this front looks like a language again as you walked through from the main entrance.
Agreed. And we've got more here of that entrance, and you can see they go top to bottom. They are peppered throughout. You can see all the people walking through. You have to wonder, aren't there people in India who walk through here and have, see these as well and have to wonder what they're for? I mean, aren't there local tales and legends about these? There must be.
You would have thought there would be written documentation on them with how significant they are to the temple, surely. I mean, if we look at other more ornate examples at the Brihadishwara temple, we can see that they're scattered everywhere here, aren't they, Andrew? I mean, you've got...
That's right.
We move to other walls and you get more singular ornate examples, almost like an engineering mark. I mean, sometimes they're hard to spot, aren't they?
This is like a Where's Waldo, isn't it? Like you'll have, anyone watching will probably have to take a few minutes to really look at this wall to see where they are. And we've looked at this wall a few times, so we can help you out. I mean, look here, you have 1, 2, this one's kind of hidden back in behind the art. You have one down here by the statuary on this column element, but not on the other side. You have a few maybe up on top that are mirrored left to right, but other areas where that is not the case. Some are very shallow and small. Obviously, others are a little bit easier to spot, but in some instances, they are just expertly hidden and tucked away in some of these little corners.
You almost notice that how ornate this part of the building is to the singular nubs that they put there. Now, it tends to be on the front of the temples that we're seeing where it's a flat surface. They're showing us the language. They're telling us what the temple is, or they're showing us what they want to show us. And then the singular, more ornate nubs around this intricate work signifies maybe an engineering marker or something to show, the person that did the work. It's not a language per se. That we're looking at here, more of a marker to the engineer.
Yeah, like an authentication stamp of authenticity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
A signature of some kind, right? Yeah, I could see that being more the case here, where, there's not as much being said, but I think there is still information being conveyed. And we have another example as well.
Absolutely.
Let's see, I had... another nice ornate example that's somewhat hidden, and you just spotted as well. If you look under these steps, we have a couple nubs. They are not quite uniform, but you one on either side of the steps. And then you noticed, Phil, let's look real close, a tiny little nub here on the corner.
Look to the right-hand side of the step, just sticking out. You can just see him. Just there on the left-hand side.
A faint one.
There
right.
She is.
That's right.
Unbelievable. That if you have to look at every single block, don't you?
You do.
To find the nubs. I mean, some of them almost look like they've got a slight beveled line as well, like a bevel edge.
I could see that.
But
yes.
Those nubs there. Those nubs are quite well hidden. They've been painted over. We see that at other temples that we'll look at in India as well.
That's true.
But it's a fantastic. These are base stone nubs at the end of the day that we refer to as base stone nubs, don't we, Andrew? And a variation of them.
We have more examples.
Circular or square, to a degree. But they're not on every single block, are they?
No. Here's another good example of base stone nubs. And like in my video, laying the nub foundations, it's kind of dedicated to this phenomenon. And we'll see this in a lot of places. Assos, Turkey, has them all the way around. Segesta, Italy, like we've talked about many times, all the way around the foundation. So here again, the same kind of phenomenon. They're not on every block, not, evenly distributed. There's clustering. Some of them are blank, no nubs. So yeah, there's information being portrayed here.
You could also look at where they do singular nubs, where they're actually on their own, and it's almost like a marker to the specific engineer at certain temples.
Mm-hmm.
And we get that at the Brihadishwara, but the base stone nubs do suggest if above that, they don't show any others, do they?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't they there if it was, meant to be on every single block? It isn't. So the front of the temple showed where the language is and what it meant. And as you go through, you find the more singular and ornate versions in the base stone nubs as you walk through the temple.
I like that. Mm-hmm. And like you were saying about the different levels of protrusion and the profiles, here we have a good example. I bet no one even noticed until we'll point them out. Over here on the left, we have very faint nubs. You see these traces on these blocks. These are nubs, but they are as shallow as they can be, right? They are almost flush with the block. So how do we interpret the different levels of protrusion, and what does it mean when they are very shallow versus very pronounced?
To me, it's got to mean something along the lines of a language or a number communication or a specific marker to the engineer or builder that made them in this instance.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not on every single block, are they?
No, a clear example here. On the other side, there's smooth surfaces, not even a hint or a trace. Maybe there's some blown out areas, inverted possibility, right? The inverted nubs. But no, it's not something that's as simple as a decoration or just a secondary byproduct of the block making process. That might be part of it, but that's not all of it. There's definitely more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's one of the most fascinating temples, along with Tamiya Nadu, that you and I have studied, which does prescribe a language and or an engineering mark. I mean, look at the base stone nubs here.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're very ornate.
Mm-hmm.
They're very ornate. They're very small. Mm-hmm. Some instances they're like the standardized nubs that we see elsewhere, the semicircular with the square bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But they're base stone nubs, Andrew, and they don't go all the way up the temple. Whereas at the front of the Brihadishwara, it does prescribe that the engineers were very happy. They must have been working together, and look at the ornate masterpieces in India that we're looking at here. I mean, these were not just average engineers, were they? No. These were the nub engineers at their very best.
I think this
I know we've got a couple of thank yous to make before we finish today.
Yes, we do.
I'd like to say and introduce Jamie Beth and the two girls that she has. They're budding nubologists. And welcome to the team, Jamie Beth, and a massive thank you to all of the team. You all know who you are for all the hard work that you put in. Agreed. I know you've got a specific thank you to say on behalf of us, Andrew, to somebody that works very hard alongside us.
I do. We have to bring him up because Ziggy Dan, thank you very much, sir. You have the 2 best videos on nubs in India as of this moment. If you guys want a very quick overview of Brihadishwara Temple, here you go. Part 1 and Part 2, no narration, nice short video set to music, quick cuts, shows you the evidence, probably better than we did today. You guys make up your own opinions on what you see, but Ziggy will give you the best look at the nubs at these temples. He's found the best angles and the most expressions and the most walls. It's
some of the angles that he finds, some of the doorway nubs, some of the base stone nubs. It's phenomenal work. I have to put him up there with these 2 videos. He's done fantastically well.
Very important.
Been a pleasure. Been a pleasure working with him, and I suggest that everybody goes across and has a look at these videos and adds to their collection with them. Fantastic work, mate. Really well done.
Yes, this is
very much indeed for all that you've done for us.
Agreed. Well, we will be referencing this for a long time. We're going to need these kind of reference videos. It helps prove our point very succinctly. It's the best way to do it.
And we look forward to seeing you all again on our next video and our next temple expedition in India. Thank you, guys.
Yep, thank you, Phil, and I will have all the links in the description, and look forward to more temples in India and elsewhere around the world. Thank you, guys.